Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Mofield, and I am an assistant professor at Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. And there I teach in the graduate education program for gifted education and also in the EDD program. I teach the research and statistics classes for the EDD in leadership and organizational change. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about my research over the past 15 years really in around perfectionism. And it all started with my own doctoral dissertation in understanding perfectionism in gifted students. And I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the studies I've done since then with my colleague, Dr. Megan Parker-Peters. And then some practical things that you can do to address perfectionism with your students. So I'm also the Curriculum Network Chair for the NAGC, and I'm also highly involved in writing, co-authoring high quality gifted curriculum. So anyways, that's just a little bit about my involvement with my passion, gifted education. All right, so here, what are we doing in gifted ed? We're all about helping transform this potential, this possibility we see in students into actual achievement. And so what gets in the way of that? Well, a lot of things, but one thing that gets in the way is perfectionism. Trying so hard to be perfect that it can actually paralyze you. So what we know is that what is it that differentiates people from achieving at the highest level from those who don't? Is the ability to handle setbacks, to handle failures, to handle things that get in your way. And if you're a person who deals with perfectionism, you can't get over making a mistake that will indeed inhibit your trajectory towards achievement. All right, so what is perfectionism? Well, ultimately, it's just striving towards a very high standard, but there are different motivations behind perfectionism. I mean, for some, it's like, I just want to do a good job. I just want to pursue excellence. Like, that's just my goal. But sometimes it comes out of more of an avoidance orientation, and it's about avoiding shame and avoiding failure and doing everything you can do to protect yourself. And that's where we see the issues with perfectionism. Some of the main theories and the background theories is just when you're so dissatisfied with how you're doing, you're constantly comparing yourself to others. It's a nightmare feeling, and it's when your self-worth actually is based on how well becomes concerning. So the underlying belief system is like, I'm worthy, I'm a good person, I am lovable if I achieve. If I am perfect, then I am okay. But if anything is off, I am not a worthy person. That's the underlying belief system. But there have been some theories that have brought about that there are really two dimensions of perfectionism. There's the normal or the healthy kind, where it's just we're just wanting to do a good job out of just sheer enjoyment and satisfaction, to the more unhealthy, or what's also been called neurotic perfectionism, and that's that self-criticism, that shame and that guilt that's involved, that intense self-judgment. So here's a key question, is perfectionism more prevalent in gifted students than typical students? Well, that's a lot of what I wanted to find out in my studies. So in a lot of the historical literature, it says no, they are not more perfectionistic. When we do research studies, there's no statistically significant difference. Other studies have shown, yes, gifted students actually have higher healthy perfectionism. They have higher goals and higher organizational skills to achieve those goals, but only in the adaptive or healthy perfectionism. Well, the studies that I have done have shown that they're higher in both adaptive and maladaptive or unhealthy perfectionism. And maybe it was just my sample, but I did 2 separate samples and looked at this. And I even compared my sample to some of the previous research, this Parker and Mills, some of the early research done about 20 years ago. And my students, they weren't just my students, but the students from my sample, they had much higher unhealthy perfectionism scores from these previous studies. And I can't really say this is a cause effect inference, but it could be that, high stakes testing wasn't as big of a deal like in the 1990s, but it was when my research was being conducted around 2008, 2009, and thereafter. So there could be a lot more pressure on kids. But I do think it's interesting. How do we answer this question? Well, the answer is some gifted students are perfectionistic. And that's what we have to keep in mind, that all gifted students really need to be seen as individuals. We can't just say, oh, all these gifted kids are so perfectionistic. But I know as a gifted ed teacher for many years, for 10 years, I dealt with some pretty perfectionistic students. And I really wanted to help them have a love of learning. That learning is awesome, that you don't have to be afraid of this your whole life. Embrace the joy of learning. And that's what I wanted dearly for my students. So that's why I pursued this. All right, so why is it that students develop perfectionism? And why is it that gifted students could be vulnerable? I'm not saying more vulnerable, but vulnerable. Well, they can actually achieve perfection. Like, they have high ability, so they have the means to achieve perfection on their assignments pretty easily. So they get used to being reinforced for that perfectionism. And so their identity is often tied to their high performance because they're being reinforced. This is a big one. Sometimes perfectionism is a coping mechanism to challenge themselves when they're not getting challenging curriculum. So they think, you know what? I want to challenge myself by trying to get straight hundreds on my report card. Not just straight A's, but straight hundreds. You know the kids like that? All right. And then sometimes they might feel like they have to live up to this standard that everyone, it's not that in reality people expect it, but they perceive that they're expected to perform so well. And so they have to live up to that standard. Perfectionism is really based on fear. And so when you think about what is it you're afraid of, public speaking, roller coaster, snakes, or spiders, think about that awful feeling you have when you've got to do something you do not want to do. And I think sometimes we forget what it really feels like to have that fear. And when you think about the child dealing with perfectionism and being so scared to get up in front of everyone to speak at the Model UN conference, or that they don't want to take that hard honors course because they might make a B, it's all rooted in this same feeling of fear. And remember, like I said, and this comes from other people out there, I think Brene Brown said this, that perfectionism is a shield for shame. It is what we do to protect ourselves. Like, I will be so perfect that I do not have to feel the sting of feeling like I'm not good enough. And I've got to have this sense of self-worth so much. I'm just going to be so perfect. I hate the sting so bad. I'm going to shield myself from experience this feeling of shame, a feeling that I am not a good person at heart. All right, that's pretty serious, isn't it? Well, so these are the thinking styles of perfectionists. They are trying to regulate this sense of shame, this emotion of shame, by having a sense of control. That if I am in control of all things, I will not have to encounter shame. Or they're constantly thinking about the past. I should have done that. Oops, I should have said this. Man, why didn't I do that? They're constantly rethinking what they should have done to avoid the feeling of shame they're experiencing now. Or it's just all or none. One mistake means that the whole shebang was bad. Or they magnify the negative, like everything went so well, but there was one comment said, like, you needed to make more eye contact in your presentation, sweetheart. That's the one thing that has stuck with them. They're magnifying that, and they dismiss the positive. So a lot of perfectionism is related to these mindset beliefs, and that's what a lot of my published research with Dr. Megan Parker Peters is about. And so I don't want to get too much into mindset because I think it's like kind of overkill right now, but I do want to make the connection that this belief system of having a fixed mindset that my intelligence is what it is, it doesn't change, this is as smart as I'll ever be, I was born this way, I've got to look smart, I'm not going to try anything new because I don't want to look dumb, I don't want to try hard because that means that I might not really be as smart as people think I am. Like, this whole way of thinking is statistically related to having unhealthy perfectionism. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then this way of thinking, believing that your intelligence can grow and embracing opportunities, challenges as opportunities, this is indeed related to having a healthy mindset. So I'm sure that you're able to recognize these thinking patterns in your students and even in yourselves. Something to keep in mind is that these both can coexist, and when you have both forms of thinking coexisting, the unhealthy dimensions of perfectionism will trump the healthy ones. Okay, so getting down to interventions, it's important to kind of think, what is the root cause of this perfectionism? Is the child seeking recognition? Are they trying to be seen? Maybe they feel invisible. Are they trying to gain acceptance in some way? Is this a way for them to manage unpleasant emotions? So we have to ask ourselves, what is the benefit they're getting from being so perfect? You may recognize many of these types of behaviors, and it's important to see that, there's the active behaviors where the kid is trying to take control by workaholism, overcompensating, checking and rechecking, checking and rechecking. This is what they're doing to try to be perfect. Then there's the avoidance behaviors, which will eventually lead to underachievement. And that's when they got to put off the pain of trying so hard and being perfect by procrastinating, or they self-handicap themselves. And that's when they do things like do the homework on the bus or not do anything at all. And then they're able to say things like, well, if I had tried, I could have done that. And so they get to avoid the situation and then avoid any sense of shame. We also see this in kids being indecisive. They don't want to say what they really think about something for fear of being wrong, or they give up too quickly, and then they eventually underachieve. They just don't do it. All right, so I'm going to just move on and talk about what do we do about this? Well, we can help the child gain self-awareness and even just ask them, well, what helpful standards do you hold of yourselves? What might be unrealistic here? What's going on? What's problematic? How does your perfectionism affect you and other people? How does it affect your feelings? It's important to help make explicit the connection between their thoughts and their beliefs, which we talked about a lot, and their emotions. So, they get a 95, and there's a lot of ways kids interpret this. Yes, I'm so proud I studied. Or they might interpret it, my teacher hates me. Or I'm just not good at math, this grade here. Or Sarah made 100, I'm not as smart as her. I hope my parents are pleased. Or maybe, what did I miss? What could I learn from that? That's the growth mindset, right? Well, we have to help identify what's underneath your thinking that your teacher hates you or that you're not good at it. And then how can we link that thinking to an emotion? And so you can't change their thoughts, and you can't guide them into this reframing until they're able to articulate their thoughts. So some things that we can do, we can help them let's look at the big picture here. Let's look at the evidence of what's going on. You didn't do well this time, but think about the past. What would your friends say about this? Let's look at the overall big picture. And what would be the worst thing that would happen if you got a B? And then what? And then what? And then what? And have them just voice their fear, just keep talking about their fears. Will they die? Will they actually die? And then to talk about, what would be the best thing that would happen? So that kind of uncovers what's deep down in their heart. What is their motivation for wanting to do so well? So I've got a picture of an ant killer here because we want to identify these automatic negative self-talks and spray them with ant killer. These I have to, I must, I ought to thoughts. We're wanting to acknowledge that they're there and get rid of them. And so this is a matter of helping them reframe negative self-talk into more constructive self-talk. All right, this video is so short, so I'm just going to go through a few other quick strategies. There's also this strategy that my colleague and I have developed called SWOT. Let's SWOT these thoughts. So we've got the situation. What's the thought associated with it? And what's that emotion? Help them identify that this is related to fear or disappointment, and SWOT that thought and change or reframe that thought. All right, it's important for us to reflect, or to help parents reflect on, how is perfectionism being reinforced here? Have they learned this behavior? Have they learned that this is a part of their identity? And what is their benefit? And I'm sure you've heard a lot about how we praise students. It's so important. It's easy for us to say these things about they're brilliant, they're the smartest, and I do think be told they're gifted if we explain it in the appropriate way, and for them to understand that they have these positive strengths and qualities, but over time they need to hear us more reinforce these words associated with success. And as you have probably heard, this process praise, when we focus on the process, it helps them understand, it's what I did that led to my success. It's not that I popped out of my mother's womb and was born this way that led to my success. It's because of what I did. It's because of my thought process and how I worked hard that led to my success. So it's important for us to frame giftedness as something to be developed over time, and that's developed with learning, passion, and persistence, rather than something that's just associated with natural talent. Okay, so just some final tips. It's just important to value them for who they are at their core being, and telling them that they don't have to be perfect. Sometimes perfectionism is just so related to me, I have to be perfect. They need to think beyond themselves. And so if you think about a time in your life when you have felt valued as a human being, beyond just accomplishing something, it's probably because you contributed to someone else's life. And so, are we giving our students opportunities to contribute beyond themselves? Because that's another way for them to feel value that they so desperately need. And so, a lot of these things we have briefly covered. We want to help them enjoy the present moment because they're so caught up about, I should have done this in the past. And they're so worried sometimes about the future. We can help them be mindful of the present. All right, so I'm going to close with some resources. These are great books that could be helpful to share with parents, or if you want to read up a little bit more on perfectionism. This is a resource that I've co-authored with Dr. Megan Parker Peters. Part of my dissertation research where I actually implemented a kind of a curriculum intervention for small groups of perfectionistic kids. Part of that intervention is in here. It's in part 2, where there are specific lesson plans to use with small groups of students who particularly deal with perfectionism. This is my contact information. I'm also sharing an article from Gifted Child Today that you may be interested in. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and have a great day.